Bill Roths.
The who? Which one is McCool?
Thanks, Dennis. I got a bunch of pages of notes, but I'm not going to read hardly any of them. The next inductee into the Wrestling Hall of Fame really needs no introduction in the state of Iowa. Marv Reiland has been around the sport of wrestling for over 40 years now. He's been an official for over 42 years. He's been a coach. He was a coach many years at Eagle Grove from 1970 through 1990. He was a head coach for 17 of those years, and then 3 years as the assistant. Many dual meet wins, 3 state titles, the traditional state tournament, and then 1 state championship dual meet team in 1987. Coached 71 state qualifiers, 14 state champions, and 14 state runners-up. We've all read about most of his accomplishments, so I'm not going to carry on much more about that. But I am just going to say that Marv has been an excellent student, athlete, coach, current athletic director, husband, father, and a friend to wrestling. Without further ado, Marv Reiland from Iowa City.
Thank you, Bill. You didn't want to read that long resume that my mother wrote up for you. Actually, I wrote a few notes down so I wouldn't forget something. Now I can't remember where I put them. I am very honored and humbled to receive this, but before I get into that, I would like to congratulate the other 3 inductees. And when Bill had called me about a year ago and told me that I was going to be selected and knew who the other inductees were, a couple things came to mind, one about each one of them actually. When I heard Mark Simlinger, I thought, Sindo. I will never forget Jim Miller jumping his arms and him carrying him around the state championship mat. And Mill Boy, your smile was from ear to ear. That's one thing I'll never forget. Bob Buzzard, I never really had the opportunity to meet him until today. And I wrestled at UNI under Chuck Pat, and Chuck is an East Waterloo boy. And we got to travel a lot from site to site in a car in those days. And it never failed that Chuck had something to say about the Buzzards in East Waterloo. And he'd always say how tough they were, and he'd get done and he'd say, sheesh, what a tough SOB. And that's the truth. And then Gene, I had the good fortune of not necessarily coaching against him because I was leaving the coaching ranks when he was coming in, but I got to work with him as an administrator when he was coaching in Cedar Falls, officiate for him, etc. I will always remember him as being the cool, calm, collected one, and some of the young assistants would get a little out of line once in a while, and Gene would say, hold it down, not to mention anybody, Keith, just in case. But anyway, I remember those things about those individuals and want to congratulate all of you on this induction as well. When Bill called me, I guess it was about a year ago, I was actually out in the garage working on my honeydew list, and my wife Marlis brought the phone out, and she says, Bill Roths on the phone. I said, what? What's Bill want? This is a month and a half after the state tournament. We didn't have any wrestling to talk about. So he proceeded to tell me that the selection committee had selected me as one of the 2012 inductees. And it kind of just like went over my head. I thought, now, I can't believe that this is happening. And he probably thought he was talking to a zombie because there really wasn't much of a response coming back. But after we were done, I went in the house and gave my wife the phone and said, you won't believe this. And she says, no, I don't believe this. A lot of confidence, so. But anyway, I went on the website and looked at the website. I couldn't believe the history there, starting in 1970. And even though I live in Iowa City now and lived there for 22 years, my roots go back to Eagle Grove. And like Bob Sims and I were talking earlier, there's quite an Eagle Grove connection here. And I was looking through there, George Martin, one of the first inductees, went on to coach at University of Wisconsin. My wife's brother wrestled for him at Wisconsin for a semester. Champ Martin, who is someone that Bob looked up to, was a teammate of my father-in-law at Eagle Grove, was a champion. And then, of course, Bob wrestled there, coached there. The story about Bob, the Eagle Grove Invitational is the oldest invitational in the state of Iowa, high school-wise. And when we had our 50th anniversary, I called Bob and said, Bob, would you mind coming up here and working this historic event? Then you will have wrestled, coached, and officiated in it. And he was there in a minute. So I appreciated him doing that. Most of you know Bill Nelson, Eagle Grove connection. Ron Gray, who probably would have been the first 4-time state champ if he wouldn't have stubbed his toe. My high school coach, Dave Hardy, who's also a member of this Hall of Fame. So there's quite an Eagle Grove connection here, and I'm proud to be part of that. I look back, when I started wrestling, as was indicated earlier, there weren't a lot of wrestling clubs, things like they have nowadays. First time I wrestled was 7th grade. And up prior to that time, I was just a little guy growing up on the farm. I had aspirations of being a Major League Baseball player. Mickey Mantle was my hero, but I figured out I wasn't going to be big enough and be a switch hitter to be a Major League Baseball player, so I tried wrestling. Very first match I wrestled, 7th grade, some hot shot from Fort Dodge, you know, and they had a little better background over there than we had in Eagle Grove at that time. But all I remember is it didn't last very long and the lights were really bright. But I will say that was the only time that had happened. And you know, as time went on, I continued to improve, get a little better. That's when Dave Hardy kind of got into my life. He was probably one of the most influential people that I had. Got me interested in wrestling, worked with me to get better, worked with me to be a better person. In my 9th grade year, you know, back then it was 95, I would eat 2 bowls of oatmeal, 2 glasses of milk before I come in and weigh in the morning. And that was trying to make 95. But by the end of the year, things were going pretty well. That was right after Bob Steenlich had just won his 4th state title. That had never happened before. So all of us that were freshmen were thinking, we're going to go to state, we're going to be the next 4-timer. Well, as things worked out, had a great year, won the sectional, went to district, got beaten overtime 1 point. So there goes that dream. But nonetheless, continued to work hard. By the time I got to be a senior, did make it to the state tournament, but had an early exit. But something happened, and Coach Patton was there, and Coach Hardy. They thought maybe I'd have an opportunity to wrestle later on at the college level. They took a chance on me, and when I went to UNI, it was actually SCI at that time. Good things started to happen at the college level. Sophomore year, really had a great year. Going into D2, because you had to qualify through D2 back then in order to qualify for the D1 tournament. And I went in there as the 2nd seed, and as Tommy Brands would say, got into the first match and pooped my pants. It wasn't a very good experience, so naturally I was knocked out. Next year ended up placing in D2, placed it in D1, and then my senior year placed in D2 as well. But you know, I had an opportunity there to work with Chuck Patton, who taught me a lot, not just about wrestling, but about life, and got me through school in 4 years. Had the opportunity to go back to Eagle Grove to replace my high school coach, Dave Hardy. And you know, between Dave and Chuck, they've meant the world to me. Very fortunate when I went back there to have a group of good kids year after year, come from good families. We did win a few state championships and so on. One of the things I treasured was, as a young coach, getting to go back and coach against the likes of a Dale Brand, a Champ Martin, a Keith Young, a Bob Dara, which Bob, by the way, I still have a bone to pick with you. We invited Dowling up one year. You know, we had this double duel. They were loaded. They'd won like 300 matches in a row or something like that. And we were in a tight battle, and my 55 pounder had his 55 pounder on his back and was really putting to him. I could see Bob over there in the corner. He was squirming a little bit. Pretty soon he said, poke him in the eye. So he did. My kid punched him and they both got disqualified. That's a true story, isn't it, Bob? Well, maybe you didn't say all that.
The only thing about anybody that ever wrestled in Northern Iowa, Jerry Ray relieved you because that refereed that match, and he said, Coach Jerry, Northern Iowa wrestlers don't cuss. I can hardly believe that.
That was enjoyable as a young coach, getting to compete against some of those veteran coaches, and it also gave me the opportunity to coach my son Mark, who had a very successful career. I guess it was a great experience 90% of the time anyway. Once in a while we were at odds, but being a coach's son, you always had to do the little extra, and that's something that he learned to do. And it paid off for him, winning a couple state championships and then the NCAA title down at Iowa. And Mark and his wife Michelle are here tonight, so if you just wave and stand up, thank you for coming. I've also been fortunate enough to, and be smart enough to, as athletic director at Iowa City West, to hire him as my head wrestling coach 13 years ago, so that's been a good move as well. Anyway, I stepped down from the head coaching position in '87 when he went to the University of Iowa because I wanted to be able to follow and not miss any of his college matches, and that certainly was a good decision. As soon as I did that, I bet it wasn't 2 months later, Dave Hardy called me and said, would you mind helping me and Sid? He always called Bob Sid and Sid. He said, we need help interpreting the rules for the high school coaches around the state. So I did that. It was fun having some of those meetings with Bob and Dave because you catch up on a little history there as well. Except Bob and I always got sent on the long trips. None of the short trips were left for us. But you know, I would say wrestling has played a very important role in my life. It's given me the opportunity to meet two great coaches in Dave Hardy and Chuck Patton. Something our family has always been involved in. Little story, when I started wrestling in 7th grade and got to high school, started dating a girl. We started going steady in 8th grade. We've been together ever since, so that's been a long time. She's been our biggest cheerleader. When I say our, my son and I. And now as I officiate, she's a cheerleader in the stands also because I work tournaments once in a while where our kids are maybe there too. And somebody will say, she'll make a comment like, that really was a good call and you need to work on your sportsmanship. But with that, I would like to certainly thank the selection committee, the board of directors for this honor. You know, I'm very proud to be part of this Iowa Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I'll certainly cherish it the rest of my life, so thank you.